Hello all and welcome to Angela Brennan Creations. Today I'm going to be making many cards for a card drive called Spreading Handmade Cheer, the teaching staff in my son's school. They've been great in the current environment and have worked really hard to adapt the constant changes in the environment and yet continuing to teach the children and ensure they don't fall behind. I'm going to be using Turnabout stamps, which are new to me, but have been in the market for at least a couple of years. Concord & Ninth is the company that makes these amazing stamps, and they're an easy way to cover an entire background of a card. The Turnabout stamps are slightly dearer than the regular stamps, so I was waiting for a sale to get this. There are many newer Turnabout stamps in the market, but these are the ones that were on sale that I have today and will be using in my cards today. Hope you enjoyed the video. So these stamps here, diagonal, the dotted, now I won't be using all of it. I'll only use 3 of them, and I'll be using this Turnabout jig to make these covers. These are all the cards that I made, and these stamps were such a joy to use, and I enjoyed making them with various colors. So let's get started. The first stamp is going to be the Concord & Nine diagonal stamp. There are 4 ways you can do this. You can either stamp it once, twice, 3 times, or 4 times. So I generally stamp it 4 times most of the time, but sometimes I do it the 3rd time and I use some slight differences in it. So you'll see. So you use the Turnabout jig and you use the guide that comes with it. You do align that guide with the cross that's on the Turnabout jig. Now if you don't have a Turnabout jig, you can always get a plastic and draw a cross on it and use it. But the Turnabout jig comes in really handy with this Turnabout stamps. Now I'm starting with a diagonal because of its geometric design. It's a little bit more technical. You've got to be really precise in it so you can line up the lines. Now the way to do it, the trick here is to ensure that the longer lines are actually aligned to the stamp. It's the longer lines. Once the longer lines are aligned, then the center tends to get aligned properly as you do the 4 turns. So each time you make a turn, it's going to be a 90-degree turn in the same way, whether it's clockwise or anti-clockwise. It does not matter as long as it's consistently applied for all 4 turns. The Turnabout jig's got a number at the top corner, so it's got 1, 2, 3, 4 to keep you right, and that it tends to turn in an anti-clockwise, and that's kind of what I follow in most of it. Sometimes I forget and I do my own thing, but as long as it's consistently used, it's fine. So that's what I'm going to do. So first thing I do is and using a stamping tool comes in really handy for this. Any stamping tool, it doesn't matter. So I get the stamp onto the cover and then I peel off the plastic. And there, that's me ready to start stamping. So now I need to get my card onto it. I'm going to get the card onto the Turnabout jig and needs to be consistent on it. So what I'm going to use is some temporary tape. Now this temporary tape, you just need to put 2 or 3 stripes onto it. Now what that does, it allows the card to stay onto the Turnabout jig, and then it does come out very easily once it's done. For the first project, I use Distress Oxide inks, and the first color is peeled paint, which is a vibrant green. Distress Oxide inks are great for ink blending as well as stamping. It's a mixture between a dye and a pigment ink, so it doesn't dry as fast as dye ink, so that's something to keep in mind so you don't smear your projects. I tend to stamp the colors of my inks twice, so that's me stamping it for the 2nd time so that I get a more vibrant color. The colors are deeper and more vibrant, and I like that. So in this video I'm not going to show you the 2nd stamping again. So now I'm turning my stamp to the 2nd, and the Turnabout jig turns it on an anti-clockwise basis. It keeps you right as long as you follow the number at the top. So clean the stamp with lots of solid parts in the stamp, so good clean is good. The 2nd color is Mermaid Lagoon. It's another Distress Oxide color and it's a vibrant blue. I like to use blues and greens together. It's kind of my favorite combinations when I tend to do projects, but I try to move to different color combinations as well. So I turn the jig again and make sure the number 3 is in the top right hand corner to ensure I'm going to be not stamping over any color but stamping in a new white space that is for the 3rd Turnabout. Clean my stamp properly with a stamp chamois, or I use a stamp chamois and I like that, and then make sure it's dry with a dry cloth. And the 3rd color is Peacock Feathers. Now Peacock Feathers is a teal color. It's a combination of blue and green, and I like to use it with blues and greens because I think it goes well. It doesn't matter if some of those inks go onto the not raised part of the stamp, and that's the beauty of using a stamping tool, because it only gets the ink on the raised part of the stamp onto your project. So now Distress Oxide inks, as they take a little while to dry, I leave it for a little while to air dry, because for the fourth turn I'm going to use Versamark ink because I want to do some embossing. So I put some anti-static bag on it to make sure that the embossing powder only adheres to the parts where the Versamark ink is stamped and not to any other parts of the ink which may be wet. So you need to really make sure that if you use Distress Oxide inks or any inks, that they dry before you do any embossing. So I thought it'd be nice, the fourth one, to do embossing. So here's my Versamark, which I'm going to make sure it's quite well placed onto the stamp and all the solid parts of the stamp. Stamp it onto my project and sprinkle it with silver embossing powder. I do remove the card from the Turnabout jig before I sprinkle any embossing powder or even heat set it, because if not it'll ruin the Turnabout jig. So I do store my embossing powder in containers, the ones that I use most often, and so that it's not troublesome to put it back into tiny jars again. So see, when I'm sprinkling the silver embossing powder, it does not adhere to other parts of the card because I made sure that the ink was dried properly. If not, it'll be a mess. You can, if it gets into other bits, you can remove it with a dry paintbrush so that you can remove it from bits you don't want it to, but it's best to leave it to dry and use an anti-static bag to ensure that the embossing powder only adheres to the parts you want it to adhere. If not, there'll be a lot of hassle. So now that the embossing powder has been put onto the card, I heat up my embossing tool. The embossing tool, to heat it up a little while before you put it onto the card so it doesn't warp your card. And after crafting for so many years, seeing the embossing powder melt is something that still thrills me. I like to see it melt because it's quite lovely. As you can see here, I've captured that on this video. Now, once all the embossing powder is melted, can convert it into a card. So that's you done with this particular image. Now you could also use some sticky powder and put glitter on it. That's something I did not do, but that's something to do to add more shimmer and glitter to your card. So this is the completed background. And I also stamped another one with all Distress Oxide inks. It goes to show with one stamp you can have different colors. I have 3 stamps, many backgrounds with many color combinations. Can get a bit carried away. So that's one way to mass produce cards when you've got your jig already aligned. So for the next one, I'm going to be using dye inks, and I'm going to leave you with some music